Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a corridor of polished lacquer and painted screens, where every shadow carries a story. And tonight we'll uncover why one assassin's name, Jing Ke, still lives in legend, while dozens of others dissolved into silence. History remembers him because he carried a silk map into the court of Qing, yet that map concealed more than parchment. It carried a secret that almost changed the destiny of China. The lanterns tremble against the carved wood, and you and I let our footsteps slow. This is not an ordinary hall. It is a stage. And somewhere in this hush lies a twist that scribes refuse to record. A detail so sharp it could cut the silence itself. You might not survive this stillness. Do you dare find out how it was done? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you shared your location and the time where you are listening. Midnight in Toronto, early morning in Sydney, maybe a quiet afternoon in Buenos Aires. Together, we make a constellation of little lanterns across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine for a moment a cold riverbank, its reeds bending like unfinished brushstrokes across the page of night. A wooden boat waits, its hull sighing against the current. The man who steps forward has rehearsed not with swordplay, but with stillness. His name, Jing Ke, would echo for centuries. But in this moment, he is only one among many retainers who carried maps, gifts, or folded cloth into the presence of kings. What sets him apart is not the blade hidden inside the scroll, but the timing, the stage, the hinge of an age. Qin was rising, unification was imminent, and his attempt could be turned into theatre, into a parable of loyalty. Others who stood in the same hush lacked that stage, and history allowed them to vanish. You and I linger in this corridor of almost. The truth is that most assassination attempts failed, and failure is often erased. But failure has a presence. It changes the way a ruler breathes at night, alters how a court arranges its rituals, how guards rehearse their steps. Silence after a near strike is not the same silence as before. It is thicker, heavier, more watchful. Think of how many unrecorded figures waited in border inns, practicing their bow in front of a bronze mirror. How many hands rolled silk again and again, training their grip until it felt like second nature. How many soldiers slipped into formation during a change of guards, hoping no one noticed the rhythm of their steps. Most were caught, erased in a line or two. A plot was discovered, a treachery prevented. Those words hold world's nights of pacing, whispers between friends, letters burned at dawn. Yet the scribes chose not to carry those names, because silence was more useful than detail. And so tonight, we keep them company. We let the lantern light fall equally on the remembered and the forgotten. We remind ourselves that silence is not judgment. It is simply the sound of parchment choosing what it can hold. Ahead, though, a shift is coming. The air along this corridor feels different, as if preparing to open into something larger. There is a cold river waiting, a silk-bound map glowing faintly in the light, and an audience chamber where ceremony and danger will step onto the same floor. And that is where our journey turns. You and I are still by the river where the reeds write their soft calligraphy on the wind, and the boat's small rope clicks against its post like a sleepy metronome. The lantern behind us is only a memory now, and the current draws us toward an age when maps were doors and manners were moves. The warring states did not sit politely on a page. They pressed against one another like sharp porcelain shards, glossy, beautiful, and edged. In that world walked the Yosha, the wandering knights-errant, who drifted between inns and little courts, the way moths try one lamp after another, carrying more than objects. They carried timing, patience, and the kind of loyalty that could be unrolled like a scroll at exactly the right moment. Their craft was not spectacle, it was stillness. A retainer practiced the distance between a smile and a breath, until muscle learned it better than thought. He rolled a silk map so many times that his fingers kept the memory even in sleep. He taught his hands to forget their hands. If battlefield heroes trained for noise, these men trained for hush, the kind of quiet that makes a room listen to you without realizing it is listening. At the border inn, the codes were simple and deep. A cup turned clockwise meant road clear. Counterclockwise meant eyes are watching. A cloak rolled tight by the door wasn't tidiness. It was practiced leaving. Musicians tuned their zithers, where a polished bronze mirror let them watch the room without seeming to an ancient form of checking the comments without posting. The ox cart's creak passed on schedule. The same harmless story was told with the same harmless smile. And repetition turned nerves into ritual. Isn't that familiar? Even now, we rehearse in office hallways, bathroom mirrors, parked cars, different walls. Same breath holding steady before a moment that may or may not arrive. Jing Ke glows brightest in this constellation because his stage was vast and his timing poetic. Qin's weather was changing. Unification was already in the air. His act, however we name it, could be framed as loyalty performed on a grand set. But constellations have more stars than the one you point at. There is Yurang, who wore disguises like seasons and promised his life to a memory no one else wanted kept. There is Zhuanju, drawn in rough brushstrokes as the man who carried more than fish into a banquet. There is Ni Zheng, whose devotion later scribes inked darker because tragedy and loyalty do it well. These names cling because their arcs are teachable, clean, symmetric, easy to sing back as a lesson. Most arcs weren't like that. For every name that earned a paragraph, dozens were pressed into a single line. A plot was discovered. A treachery prevented. You and I can hear the life inside those phrases there pacing at midnight. The letter burned at dawn. The friend whispering, "Not tonight." But scribes were not only keepers, they were editors of memory. They trimmed the story to the shape the age could carry. Gentle foreshadowing for later. By the time we reach the final corridor, we'll see that remembrance is less about how brave someone was and more about how well their story served the appetite of the time that told it. Walk with me into a small court too, modest to survive on maps. Pine needles comb the wind. Screens painted with cranes make the air look careful. A visitor is led through layers outer garden. Side hall. A right turn. Then the audience space where the floor remembers the weight of generations. Everyone knows the script. The third tile matters. The angle of a scroll matters. The pause before speaking is the speaking. When a performance is this well known, a half-beat breath can feel like destiny. A coffee shade too early. A sleeve brushing the wrong tassel. A servant's song landing one note short so the silence falls strangely. Nothing headline-worthy, just enough to move a life from paragraph to stamp. If the inn is rehearsal, the palace is post-production. It smooths and scores the scene with ritual and, if needed, edits you into supporting cast in your own story. You belong to its rhythm before you realize you offered your name. That isn't cowardice. That is gravity. Ceremony has mass. Have you ever stepped into a meeting where the agenda printed long before you arrived seemed to decide your words for you? Palace etiquette was the original corporate memo. Precise, polite, and oddly capable of reshaping courage into nods. Beyond the famous names, small embers glow. A courier swaps cloaks with a friend and walks through a gate wearing borrowed calm. A gate captain recognizes a rhythm of steps that doesn't belong and quietly changes the watch, saving a dynasty with an instinct he can't footnote. A clerk trims a paragraph until it becomes a single sentence, not because he fears the truth, but because he fears the echo. These are not daytime thrills. They are evening warmth, the quiet knowledge that history turns on small things. And small things are everywhere. Roles. More than bravery. Granted access. Musician. Groom. Attendant. Heel reach role. Opened paths where rank could not walk without explanation. You didn't bring a louder instrument. You tuned the room. The trick was to make silence carry your weight as though you weren't there. If that sounds like a modern mic set to mute, it is presence without noise, effect without announcement. And another gentle foreshadowing. In a few halls from now, the music itself will become the key, and a single wrong note will matter more than 1,000 right ones. We pause at the river again because water understands selective memory. The surface shines with legend. Beneath it, the current carries pebbles nobody will count. A lesser retainer decides, very softly, that tonight is not his night. No alarm. No clash. Just a choice that tilts a kingdom, a degree or two because someone did nothing. Have you noticed how restraint rarely gets the story credit it deserves? The world survives on it just the same. Here is one more thread we'll follow to the end. History hums melodies that are easy to remember. Envoy. Silk map. Rising king. Near ending is catchy. You can hum it after one listen. Guard trusts his ear and corrects the rhythm of the watch is the truth that keeps a throne intact and still gets left in the drafts folder. In our era, the dramatic meeting gets retold. The quiet correction that prevented the drama becomes a shrug. Ancient problem. Modern habit. Before we leave this age, listen, carts groan beyond the inn. A zither string settles to pitch. A cup turns clockwise, and nobody comment, which is how you know it matters. The boat in our minds remains, loosely tethered, patient as a comma in a sentence, not yet finished. We will return to that comma when it's time for the period. And yet, beneath this steady quiet, something soft begins to shift. Ahead lie halls where entertainment becomes a mask, where music is an access badge, where a single note right or wrong can close a door or open one you didn't know existed. You and I drift with the river until its noise becomes gentler, more like the background hum of a fan at night than the rush of water. The fractured maps of the warring states fade, and we step into the Han, where silk stretched along caravan roads, scholars filled scrolls with endless characters, and emperors learned that the greatest danger often wore the quietest robes. The walls rose higher here, and yet the whisper of almost walked just as lightly. In this dynasty, assassination was less about grand gestures and more about masks. Imagine a court musician tuning his lute. The emperor reclines. Courtiers sip wine. The notes seem harmless, almost lulling. But under one robe lies a blade slender as a reed. The player has practiced not scales but stillness. He waits for that precise moment when attention dips. But a single wrong note arrives too sharp, too soon. Heads turn. Guards rush. The name dissolves into the chronicles with all the mercy of a rubber stamp. A plot was discovered. And you and I feel the ghost of that moment, the note still suspended in air. Half played. Half remembered. If you've ever hit the wrong button in a meeting presentation and watched everyone suddenly look up, you already know that sensation. Ancient court. Modern workplace, same silence that can curdle in a heartbeat. The Han had a talent for turning celebrations into stages of suspicion. A banquet was never only a banquet. A hunting trip was never only leisure. Picture the emperor on horseback, dust rising, dogs barking, courtiers trailing behind. In that confusion, an arrow might be drawn not toward deer but toward the throne. Sometimes the string trembled and the arrow never left. Sometimes it flew wide. Sometimes it was never meant to fly at all. But each attempt, whether noticed or not, changed the way the emperor breathed afterward. Hunts became less about freedom and more about vigilance. Have you ever gone on vacation and realized you're still checking your emails? That was the Han version of relaxation. Inside the palace, unease lived in details. A servant drawing curtains tighter than necessary. A guard checking shadows twice before putting out a lamp. A minister repeating protocol just to remind himself the world was still orderly. The official records clipped these nights down to half sentences, treachery prevented. Plot discovered, but you and I know. Silence is textured. Between those half-sentences, live hours of pacing, letters torn to ash, and friends whispering promises they couldn't keep. And here is where we foreshadow again. Failure was not emptiness. It was risk carried quietly, courage rehearsed without witness. By the time we reach the end of this journey, we will see clearly that remembrance depends less on bravery and more on whether a story had the shape history wanted. The hand teaches us this lesson gently. Not all silence is equal. Some silence is protective. Some is erasure. Poets of the age hinted at what chronicles left out. Verses spoke of jade halls where no one slept well, of swords lying too close to pillows, of flutes played for ears too wary to enjoy them. It was poetry's way of saying what couldn't be said openly, even at the height of splendor. Blades whispered in the background. Have you noticed how even lullabies sometimes carry warnings in their lyrics? That's how Han poets wrote soft on the surface, edged underneath. But don't mistake this for relentless gloom. There was humor too quiet, knowing humor. Court guards were basically the original, overzealous security staff. The kind who check your pass 3 times, even though you've worked there for 20 years. Imagine being an assassin trying to slip past that guy. Timing mattered, but so did luck. And luck rarely smiled in silk-lined corridors. And here's another foreshadowing. The hand's quiet attempts are practice for something we'll meet later. In the Tang, beauty itself will become a disguise, and splendor will cast shadows so long they could swallow whole names. Tonight's half-played chords and misfired arrows are the rehearsal for that stage. You and I linger in a Han chamber painted with cranes. Lanterns glow against tall windows. The hush feels less like absence, and more like presence, like a heavy robe laid across the chest. Failure is atmosphere now, not a single act. Silence itself has become a character in the story, shaping how everyone moves. We pause here, letting the air fill with a sound that isn't really sound, the scrape of silk against polished stone, the sigh of someone rehearsing courage they will never use. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. It is the kind of incomplete music that follows you into sleep. And yet, behind this quiet, something gentle begins to shift. The next chapter of our walk brings us to Chang'an, capital of the Tang, where avenues glowed with lantern markets. Poets set verses drifting through air, and conspiracies hid behind lines about moonlight. You and I step forward, and the corridors widen into avenues. The Han hush recedes, and suddenly we are in Chang'an, the Tang capital, where the city itself feels like a universe under walls. Streets run like the lines of a palm, markets glow with lanterns, foreign traders spill spices and silk, and poets etch moonlight into characters so sharp you can almost breathe them in. The Tang is remembered as brilliance, a dynasty of cloud-painted halls and star-filled courts, and yet brilliance always casts the deepest shadows. Picture the vermilion gates opening at dusk, flutes drifting through courtyards, dancers swirling in silk, dyed with colours brought from Persia, lamps catching the embroidered cranes on their sleeves. It looks perfect. Too perfect. And that's where suspicion breathes. A minister rides through Chang'an at sunset, and at his side walks a bodyguard whose loyalty is assumed but never proven. Every shadow flicker along the avenue could be a question. Every passerby might be more than they seem. Have you ever walked through a festival and suddenly felt you were being watched? That's the Tang paradox. Splendor on the outside, unease underneath. One story whispers of a plot against Emperor Xuanzong. It wasn't launched by strangers, but by those who had once bowed before him. The conspiracy never bloomed into theatre. A servant overheard too much, and the thread was cut before it could be woven. In the records, the conspirators exist only as lists of punishments, names tucked away like mismatched beads. What could have been a legend became instead a lesson in bureaucracy. You and I can feel that silence, not empty, but intentional, as if the scribes smoothed the fabric of memory to keep the dynasty's image free of wrinkles. And here we foreshadow, Tang scribes preferred harmony. They wanted poems and dancers, not failed daggers. Memory was curated like a gallery. Anything that didn't match the exhibit lighting was left in storage. By the end of our walk, we'll understand why some names were showcased and others never even hung on the wall. Still, hints survived in verse. A poet writes of sleepless nights in halls of jade. Another of swords resting too close to pillows. Another of lantern festivals that glowed too brightly to feel safe. These weren't confessions, they were polite ways of saying what everyone already knew. Even at the height of beauty, someone always stood too near the emperor with too much intent. Poetry was the dynasties, subtweet soft on the surface, sharp beneath. Imagine a banquet for a general fresh from victory. Wine pours, lyres sing, sleeves flutter. But suspicion is thicker than the incense. The general smiles, yet he knows a celebration can also be a stage for suspicion. Was the cup in his hand filled with honor or warning? One knife, drawn not by an outsider, but by someone in his own circle, trembles in the lamplight. It falters. Guards respond. The record reduces the moment to unrest contained. But we know better. The room itself trembled, and the night stretched longer than it should have. If Han hunts turned leisure into vigilance, the Tang turned brilliance into camouflage. The more dazzling the market, the easier for danger to disappear into the crowd. The more perfect the performance, the easier for one wrong step to matter. Have you ever watched a stage show and suddenly noticed one dancer out of rhythm? The Tang court lived in that awareness all the time. And let's not forget the humor tucked inside it. Court officials loved to praise harmony, but in practice they were like managers staging team-building retreats where everyone is smiling. But half the group is plotting who gets the next promotion. Splendor could never fully erase ambition. The dynasty preferred to patch flaws by leaving them out. Assassins were erased because they clashed with the image of lantern-lit markets and perfect couplets. It's like a family photo where the frown gets cropped out. Official Tang history is that photo album too neat to be whole. And here's another foreshadowing for us to carry. The Tang shows how memory can be edited not by accident, but by policy. This habit will grow sharper in later dynasties, until forgetting itself becomes a survival tool. By the end, we'll see how silence was sometimes the most effective weapon of all. For now, you and I linger in Chang'an's night market. Lanterns glow above. Shadows move below. A poet is drafting a line that pretends to be about the moon, but we know it's about unease in a palace room. Silk rustles. Flutes rise and fall. And the possibility of sudden ending hangs just out of sight, like a note withheld until morning. And yet, behind this splendor, something gentle begins to shift. Bureaucracy will grow thicker. Scrolls and seals will outnumber swords. We are walking toward the song, where assassins rehearsed courage in corridors made not of stone but of paper. You and I step softly out of Tang lantern markets and into quieter corridors. The Song dynasty rises ahead, not with thunder of cavalry, but with the rustle of paper. Armies still stood, of course, but the Song believed in something subtler: documents, seals, scrolls, layers of written ritual. If the Tang was brilliance, the Song was bureaucracy. Here, danger did not always slip in with a dagger. It slipped between lines of text. Imagine a palace not defended by walls alone, but by desks. Courtyards full of clerks with brushes. Registers stacked like fortresses. Seals pressed like gates. To reach an emperor meant moving through a forest of record keepers. Each step was logged. Each name written. Each purpose noted. You and I can almost hear it, the shuffle of robes, the murmur of petitions read aloud, the scratch of brush against bamboo. In such a place, to attempt something sudden was like trying to light a fire in a rainstorm. The bureaucracy itself was damp-stoned. But desperation, as we've seen before, ignores obstacles. One tale drifts toward us of a scholar official dismissed, unjustly. Nights of study wasted, his words left unread. By lamplight he sharpens not his brush, but a short dagger, laying it beside ink still wet. He envisions approaching the throne with a scroll in hand, petition in the open. Argument hidden in steel. Yet when dawn comes, when ritual carries him through gates and bowings and titles, his resolve softens. Ceremony pulls like gravity. Have you ever practiced a speech at home and then found the room itself edited your courage away? That was the song, ritual, with enough weight to bend will. He bows, presents his petition, and leaves with the blade untouched. The record does not honor his intent. It remembers only a failure of integrity. Others came closer. A soldier once slipped into formation during a guard's shift change, cloak folded over steel. For a moment, he stood within reach of the inner court, breathing the same air as an emperor. But a cough ordinary, harmless, turned too many eyes. A commander noticed steps out of rhythm. The intruder was seized, erased into a line, an intruder apprehended. No name, no echo. You and I can still feel his pulse. But history let it drop. The song preferred order over spectacle. A successful assassin would have embarrassed the dynasty. An unsuccessful one embarrassed it even more. So, scribes wrote with scissors. They reduced living, trembling men into half-sentences. The empire remembered itself not through danger, but through poetry of rivers and mountains, paintings of bamboo, reflections of friendship carved in ink. Assassins cluttered the picture. Better to let them dissolve. And yet, that silence shaped life. Guards rehearsed more carefully. Rituals grew heavier. Paper became a wall thicker than stone. To live inside this web of ink was to breathe suspicion even when nothing happened. You and I know this feeling, two endless forms. Endless meetings. Endless just to be safe rules. Modern corporate red tape is not so different. The Song dynasty perfected it a millennium earlier. Here we foreshadow again. History's filter prefers clean stories. The Song didn't want to hum tunes of failure. So memory turned away. By the time we arrive at our journey's end, we'll see how forgetting itself was policy, how silence became the sharpest tool of all. Still, fragments survive like dust in corners. A whisper of a petition rolled too tight. A mention of a guard's odd cough. A remark that a scholar's hand shook as he bowed. These details didn't merit paragraphs, but they linger. They remind us that beneath the empire's calm, countless unnamed figures rehearsed courage they never spent. And that too is history, bravery folded and set aside. We pause here among bamboo slips and shelves of scrolls. The lanterns burn steadily, but the hush between them says more than the words inked on paper. It tells us forgetting is also control. Have you noticed how sometimes the things not mentioned in family stories tell you more than what is? The Song understood that instinctively, and yet, behind this stillness, something gentle is beginning to shift. Paper walls will not be enough for what comes next. In the Ming, suspicion thickens into policy. Secret police sharpen silence into a weapon. And even shadows will be watched by other shadows. You and I step out from under the weight of the Song's scrolls and seals. And the air grows heavier. The Ming dynasty rises before us with walls vast as mountains, roofs glowing gold in the sun, and gates that seem to close not only on the city, but on memory itself. If the Song trusted paper, the Ming trusted eyes and whispers. Suspicion here was not an afterthought. It was daily air. The Forbidden City stands like a lacquered labyrinth, its courtyards echoing with footsteps that were never truly private. Emperors no longer relied only on soldiers and protocol. They relied on networks of watchers, the Eastern Depot, the secret police, eunuchs who served as both attendants and informants. Imagine living where every lantern glow might hide someone listening, where every corridor hummed with the possibility of unseen ears. You and I can feel it, a web stretched so tightly that to move within it meant vibrating a thread. And yet, the temp still came. Desperation has always been stubborn. One figure is named lost blended into the rhythm of palace life. He moved as an attendant might, his face familiar though, his identity already fraying. On a morning of routine ceremony, he found himself closer to the emperor than most could dream. But routine is the most dangerous stage. Guards knew every gesture by heart. When his hand shifted slightly out of place, the stillness shattered. The weapon was caught before it cleared its hiding place. His name was erased as quickly as his body was removed. The chronicles kept only a phrase, treachery averted. You and I recognize the pattern. The bigger the web, the shorter the stories. It was not in the dynasty's interest to let these moments breathe. Silence was policy, and forgetting was defense. Have you noticed how modern organizations handle scandal? Not with long explanations, but with press releases trimmed to half a sentence. The Ming court wrote history the same way. Less is safer. But rumors still leaked into corners. A disgraced official whispering in lamplight. A general, afraid of dishonor, drafting letters that promised sudden violence if his rank slipped. Sometimes a hired hand wandered into the city, a stranger meant to vanish into its bustle, only to be unmasked before his role began. The capital was alive with watchers. Disguise rarely held. Names dissolved into the crowd, absorbed by a city that knew how to forget on command. Here is our foreshadowing again. The Ming teaches us that paranoia itself becomes architecture. Layers of ritual, secrecy, and surveillance weren't just about safety, they were about shaping memory. By the time we reach the end of this journey, we'll see clearly that silence was not only absence, but an active, sharpened tool. And yet, the atmosphere had its own rhythm of fear. Imagine a courtyard at night, lanterns trembling pools of gold on polished stone. Incense lingers, but so does unease. The emperor withdraws deeper into inner palaces, trusting fewer and fewer people, circling himself with walls of ritual. Eunuchs become gatekeepers, deciding who may step close, and suspicion grows so thick it feels like mist. You and I stand there, watching how courage thins under such weight. Even the boldest attempt falters when measured by 100 suspicious eyes. Still, the whispers persisted. Some believed entire conspiracies lived in the army's shadows, generals dreaming of toppling a ruler with one sudden stroke. Whether real or imagined, they confirmed the emperor's fear. Danger could be anywhere. Courtiers learned to lower their voices, because words themselves might be daggers if repeated. The palace was alive with silence that had edges. The scribes wrote carefully. Too much detail risked inspiring others. Too little detail made the ruler look weak. So they trimmed and veiled, leaving fragments. A rumor here, a half poem there. Lanterns flickering against restless winds. It reads like weather, but you and I know it's code for something darker. Have you ever felt watched, even in your own home? A sense that your privacy was thinner than you wanted? The Ming court lived that feeling constantly. Suspicion was their daily companion. It was exhausting, but it was also effective. Few assassins are remembered from this dynasty not because attempts never happened, but because memory itself was placed under guard. And yet, as always, behind stillness, something shifts. Beyond these golden roofs lies the Qing, the last dynasty, where foreign origins added new layers of mistrust, where revolution began to simmer, and where silence was once more reshaped, this time in the shadow of decline. You and I step carefully into the twilight of empire. The Ming's suspicion still clings to our robes, but now the banners flutter differently. The Qing dynasty stretches before us, last of the imperial houses, its Manchu origins stitched uneasily onto Chinese soil. The forbidden city still gleams, but its courtyards feel heavier, its echoes longer. Here, assassination was not only a personal act, it was also a symptom of a vast empire straining under its own contradictions. Imagine a young Kangxi walking through a dawn hall, frost still clinging to the eaves. He is not yet the long-lived emperor history will remember. Somewhere nearby, a eunuch loyal to another faction rehearses courage. He carries no grand sword, no map rolled with silk, only the small tools of daily service: brush, cloth, tray. But those tools are keys. They open doors routine guards cannot. Still, the Qing court perfected vigilance. Guards moved in choreographed formations. Suspicion sharpened daily. The attempt, if it even reached the edge of breath, dissolved before memory could take hold. Kangxi lived long and steady, while whispers of danger vanished like frost in sunlight. And yet rumors drift. Under Qianlong, festivals brought emperor and people together. The brilliance of parades, lanterns, and music promised harmony. But conspiracies breathed in the margins. Officials weary of endless campaigns. Citizens tired of heavy taxes threads wove together in secret. A plan rose to strike amid the festival procession. But processions themselves are slow, shifting. Guards adjusted formation. Suspicion tilted the rhythm. The conspirators faltered, swallowed before the moment ripened. The record preserved almost nothing, a vague note of punishment, a hint of treachery. To us, it reads like weather, a gust that bent the lanterns for one night, are forgotten by morning. Here is our foreshadowing again. Qing scribes, like their Tang and Ming predecessors, shaped memory not by telling too much, but by telling just enough to erase detail. By the great time we reach our journey's end, we will see clearly that remembering Jing Ke was not about his courage alone, but about timing, stage, and narrative appetite. As the dynasty aged, the whispers changed flavor. The late Qing felt foreign pressure pressing hard at its gates. Assassination gained a new edge. It was no longer only court intrigue, but a tool of revolution. Secret societies saw it as a spark, a strike meant to ignite wider fire. Some carried concealed pistols, a modern echo of the ancient hidden dagger. Some attempts failed, quickly suppressed. Others succeeded but were absorbed into larger stories of decline and reform. You and I can almost stand in a courtyard as lanterns tremble and foreign boots echo faintly outside the walls. The palace insists on ceremony, yet revolutionists dream beyond the gates. The assassin is no longer just a lone retainer with a blade. He is now a symbol of collective unrest. Have you noticed how, when a system begins to fray, even the smallest act of resistance can feel larger than itself? That was the Qing's condition. Every whisper could be magnified, every rumor a threat to a fragile facade. And yet official records still preferred silence. To admit too much detail was to confess vulnerability. Better to smooth the page, to keep the emperor's image untouchable. The empire may have cracked, but the scrolls insisted on polish. It is like reading a company's annual report during its collapse. Optimistic phrases, masking fractures everyone can already see. In late nights of the Qing, poets still wrote verses. They spoke of lanterns in restless winds, of chambers where footsteps echoed strangely, of halls that seemed more fragile than they appeared. These lines were not random aesthetics. They were polite ways of saying what records could not, that fear had become permanent, and silence was the dynasty's last defense. And here's one last foreshadowing for us. The Qing shows that memory can fracture. Some stories are too small to survive. Others are too large and are absorbed into broader tales of revolution. By the end of this walk, we will see how Jing Ke endured because he offered symmetry at the hinge of history, while Qing assassins slipped into shadows of bureaucracy and decline. You and I pause now in the twilight of empire. The night air carries incense and unease. The watch drums sound across a city half ancient, half already claimed by modernity. Assassins still exist, but their stage has changed. They are no longer only individuals. They are signs of currents pulling the dynasty apart. And yet, behind this twilight stillness, something gentle begins to shift. We are being drawn to reflection, toward the final corridors of our journey, where we gather echoes of remembered names and forgotten shadows and ask, why does history choose some and abandon others? You and I return softly to the lantern-lit corridor where we began. The lacquered floor still reflects trembling light. The silence still listens harder than any servant ever did. But now we carry with us the weight of dynasties, the warring states, with their rehearsed stillness. The Han with music cut short, the Tang with shadows beneath splendor, the Song with paper walls, the Ming with webs of suspicion, the Qing with whispers dissolving into revolution. Together they form not a straight line, but a rhythm, attempt, failure, silence, memory. And here is the heart of the question we have been circling. Why does history let Jing Ke's name echo through centuries, while dozens, even hundreds, of equally brave figures dissolved into half sentences? The answer is gentler and crueler than courage. History remembers not what was bravest, but what was useful. Jing Ke's attempt happened at the hinge of an age. Qin was rising, unification imminent. His story could be told as the last bright cry of resistance, a noble failure that gave poets symmetry. Envoy, silk map, rising king. Near ending it is almost a ballad. Yu Rang, Juanju. Near Zheng they too had arcs that could be shaped into lessons. But what of the scholar who bowed, trembling, and never reached for the blade? What of the soldier recognized by a cough? What of the musician who played a wrong note and vanished into a footnote? They lacked the shape that memory prefers. We hinted at this all along. History hums melodies that are easy to remember. Symmetry is catchy. Failure that instructs is noble. Failure that embarrasses is inconvenient. And inconvenient stories are like sand slipping through fingers. You and I know this from our own lives. Think of a family album. The smiling photos remain. The quarrels over dinner do not. Or think of headlines. The dramatic meeting gets retold. The quiet correction that prevented the drama is ignored. Ancient problem. Modern habit. The scribes of Qin and Han and Tang edited memory the way editors still do, not always lying, but always curating. So tonight we gather the forgotten, if only for a moment. We keep them company. We let lantern light fall on the remembered and the erased alike. We say that courage unspent is still courage. That hesitation is not always weakness, it can be humanity. That silence is not emptiness, it is the texture of risk carried without recognition. And here, at the close, we return to our reality check. You might not survive the silence of these halls not because silence kills, but because silence edits. Do you dare carry that thought with you into sleep, that memory itself is selective, and that your own life will be remembered not for its fullest truth, but for the stories it fits? Still, there is comfort, because absence is not nothing. Even when parchment let names slip away, the air in those chambers still changed. A blade that never struck still altered the way an emperor breathed at night. A note that ended too soon still left a hush that courtiers remembered. The silence after an attempt was not the same silence as before. You and I breathe that hush now, letting it settle around us like a robe. Lanterns burn steadily. Drums of the night watch sound across a city long gone. Incense drifts, blurring the line between memory and dream. So what do we take with us tonight? Not judgment, not a list of names. Instead, a question spoken softly. Is power proven by surviving blades, or by the stories told afterward? Is memory a reward, or just another kind of chance? If you'd like to continue these journeys together, you know what to do. But for now, may sleep carry you gently through the night. May the whisper of forgotten names keep you company as you drift. And may the silence of unfinished attempts remind you how fragile and how precious every moment of history truly is.